Oh, I'm nervous now. Jose, you're making me all nervous, and I'm normally not.
I'm sure it's not your first time,
This is
Wes.
presence.
Yeah,
Look.
yeah,
It is, yeah. I'm like, oh, maybe you should stop seeing.
In the
I'm
presence
sure
of
you're
great
very
things.
nervous.
Hello, I'm Wes. Welcome to the Mexico City edition of My Surrogacy Journey, the podcast. I'm one of the founders of My Surrogacy Journey, and Michael is not with us today, so it's just the three of us. So sometimes I like a bit of a podcast without him, like break it up and mix it up a little bit. We've got two amazing guests today, and I'm going to introduce you to them in a second. We're filming and recording this podcast from our office in Polanco. So we've got an amazing Mexico City skyline for the back. So those of you who are just listening, I'm sorry you can't see it, but it is an amazing sight. We're really looking forward to busting some myths and giving people a really good insight into some of the topics that people need to understand when embarking on a journey in Mexico City. We started our Mexico City pathway in January 2023, and we improved it in 2024. And we have our physical office and team in Mexico City, which is a real joy to see. And we are really looking forward to really helping people educate themselves on surrogacy in Mexico City and all of the components within that. So let me introduce our amazing guest. So we've got Debbie is a regular on our podcast. She's our clinical and compliance director at MSJ and helps all of our intended parents and surrogates navigate through their journey as safely clinically as possible. And we're really delighted to have Dr. Jose Gutierrez from Fertilidad Integral. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
And Jose is the clinical director. And I must say, and I really just want to put this out there, that we really love working with you and the team. I think as an organization, our organizations, our values are really aligned. And I know that you work really well with the team. And I know that the patients that have gone through the clinic have had really excellent care. So we're really looking forward to expanding our relationship with the clinic and look at how we can get more and more intended parents going through there to get that support. So this episode specifically is talking about everything to do with stimulating outside of Mexico City and triggering and doing egg retrieval in Mexico City. Now, there are some scenarios where people need that. You know, we're predominantly talking about heterosexual couples or single people, and it's about giving them the facility to be able to do that. And there might be a multitude of reasons why they have to do that. But before we start, Jose, just give us a quick overview of who you are and tell us all about FI.
So thank you so much for inviting us, Wes. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to work with My Surrogacy Journey. It's been a pleasure to do this whole ramp up since last year that we started working together. I'm Jose Gutierrez. I am the medical director of Fertilidad Integral and co-founder. And I think when Wes was saying it, it struck me because my vision as we started Fertilidad Integral in 2021 was to really try to become a global clinic and try to have the size to be able to attack every problem that there is in reproduction in Mexico and in the world, but also at the same time not losing this kind of like one-to-one personal scenario that we tend to see a lot in Latin American medicine. So we want to maintain as human as possible, understanding that there will be bigger challenges that we can attack or that we can resolve as we grow and as we become more of a bigger size clinic. No? So I come from a background of, my father was one of the first people to do IVF in Mexico. He had the first baby in Mexico from IVF, and so I've been around it my whole life now. And so I've been with the family office and boutique clinics and very personalized attention. It's been a wonderful journey. But as we started Fertilidad Integral, we wanted to have two mission statements that were very important. In Fertilidad Integral, we wanted to keep two things very well in mind. One was to keep it as human as possible, okay? And two, try to tackle all the problems of reproduction in one place. So we didn't want to say, oh, you need international program for IVF, so you have to go to this other company, or you need a psychologist, so there's a psychologist on the other side of town. We try to keep it everything in the same place, so we give better access to patients. And specifically, what we're talking today is how do we resolve the complexities around? And I know we'll talk about this in a little bit, but how do we make it easier for patients from abroad to come into Mexico without losing safety and quality of services? And so we will always keep that as the first place, but how can we make it more easier as to the journey, which is perfect with the name of your company, Wes? How can we make the journey as streamlined as possible without sacrificing anything on the way. And I think that's a little bit what we will talk today with Debbie about.
Amazing. And Debbie, give us a little bit of your background.
So I'm currently the Clinical and Compliance Director at My Surrogacy Journey, and my role with all of my experience is to make sure that the intended parents, surrogates and no-neg donors have come through our sharing the journey with us from a compliant and safety point of view. So first rule of medicine is do no harm, and we would never want to put anyone in harm's way. So we work together with clinics such as Fertilidad Integral to make sure that we do keep that uppermost at all times.
Okay, so look, I think we're in safe hands with this, and I think I personally know that there's been a lot of work gone on in the backgrounds with some of the UK clinics, with you, Jose, and Debbie, to put some protocols in place to make sure that everything is considered and to make sure that we can all be successful. And we're going to date stamp this, so we're currently the 18th of March, I think, but we had our first case of doing stimulation outside of Mexico City, and the intended parents went back last week. Everything was great. It was a great learning experience, and I think from the outside looking in, it was really lovely to see how Debbie, Jose, and the doctor in the UK were all working really smartly to ensure that the protocols were in place for a successful and, but more importantly, safe process. So let's dive straight into the specifics then. So Debbie, what does it mean around stimulating outside of Mexico? Because there might be some people listening thinking, well, does this apply to me? Am I eligible? What does it mean?
Okay, so we know that stimulating a woman to get her to a point where we can retrieve eggs takes approximately around 14 days. And within that time, we're using quite powerful medication to stimulate her ovaries to produce more than that natural one egg that she would do naturally normally. And we need to coordinate that in the safest way. We need to make sure that we're getting them to a point where we can safely transfer them mid-cycle. That's not really been done very commonly. And so when I was asked, could we do that? And this was a time constraint from our last set of intended parents, a heterosexual couple, and they just couldn't commit the time for that 2-week period for the full stimulation in Mexico City. So I reached out to Jose and said, is this possible? Could we consider it? And he said, okay, yeah, we can, and lots of things to take on board. And as clinicians, it's our job to make sure that we're keeping them safe at every point. So we made it very, very clear. Jose wrote a fantastic SOP that we worked together on, collaborated, and made sure it was fit for the UK in this instance, but whichever country we're going to use this within. So we start stimulating, they start taking their injections in the UK. And we work with a clinic that's going to collaborate and understand that this patient is going to fly to Mexico on a 12-hour flight with a 6-hour time difference, and we need to foster all of that in. So there are some complications when you're stimulating, potential complications when you're stimulating a woman, which Jose can go into as well. The most clear one is a system called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And that's the key point where we want to make sure that we're not exposing that woman in any way, to make sure that we keep her as safe as possible. So in this instance, in the UK, we started the stimulation, and on day 6, she had her scan at the clinic in the UK. And according to our protocol, based on what we'd set that was the safest parameters, we decided, yes, she was now safe to transfer to Mexico City. So on day 8, she travelled out, and then Jose picked up on day 9. He then took over the care right through into egg retrieval, and he can talk about that side. But for my bit, the beginning bit was to make sure, was she safe to do so? Was the flight a convenient time? We made sure that we covered from a prophylactic point of view. We gave her TED stockings to make sure that that was comfortable, gave her aspirin to make her get through the flight. And then obviously hand over the care once they get into Mexico City. So from a practical point of view, our intended parents have a choice. They can start stimulation as long as it's safe to do so. And we've made it very clear in our protocol, if on that day 6, that she had signs of ovarian hyperstimulation, she wouldn't fly. We will never, ever put anybody at risk. And in the same instance, if she developed late onset in Mexico City, Jose would make the decision she's not safe to fly. So we all have to respond quickly, make sure that we're carrying out scans more regularly to keep them safe throughout the process.
And we've talked about this in detail in a lot of podcasts, and it's generally one of our ethos it's about everyone comes to surrogacy with a different kind of scenario. Everyone's case is unique to them, and it is very different. And it's about finding a way to start them navigating through, whether it's they're shipping embryos or whether they're creating embryos, and whether they're creating them in their home country and shipping them, or whether they are then going to create them in country. And that's what this is about. Jose, what's your view on it? And I mean, how did you feel about when Debbie first approached you about this process and how successful it could be?
I think, fortunately, we've had this kind of cases before. Now, in Mexico, there are not so many clinics everywhere in Mexico City, so we have a lot of patients that have to move around inside national territory, which is easier because there's no time difference, no? Sure. And then they're saving time, and we had some fun trying to figure out a little bit the timing, but it's doable. I think, so the first point when we started discussing this is who is the candidate, who is the patient, and why do they need it? And I think that this is extremely important because taking 14 days, 20 days of work to come to Mexico, do your transfer, etc., can be complicated. Mm-hmm. We are humans, we have families, we have work, we have responsibilities, and so it becomes complicated to do this kind of commitment to the amount of time. So that's the reason people are doing it, but we do have to be very careful in who we're selecting. These are patients who need to understand the difference, that they will have to be monitored different, they will have to make, maybe not calculation, but understand that the timing of their doses is going to be a little bit different. They have to understand they will not meet face-to-face their doctor until they get back here into Mexico. We did check a little bit on the protocol in the UK and in Mexico as to making sure that me and the doctors in the UK agree to what kind of preoperative checkups the patients need. So what do we need in hormone-wise? What do we need checking in STDs? What do we need on antral follicle count? How do we know which patients are at higher risk for hyperstimulation syndrome, which is what we're most scared about also down here, because we do not want the patient to have to stay in Mexico for a couple of extra weeks afterwards because they were hyperstimulated. And also understanding how to stimulate the patient, because these are powerful drugs, and we all use them a little bit differently. So the understanding between the doctor who's referring, that this case will be UK who's starting the stimulation, but also the doctor who's receiving, who will take on, let's say, the higher risk moment. There has to be a clear understanding, because the risk, we all want the patient safety first, but we also want to understand as to where do we push those boundaries, because we also want a baby. So it's a little bit complicated as to where do you fall into it. And I think the first part of this communication has been awesome with Debbie, with the doctors in the UK. I mean, it's been a good collaboration. We've all aligned ourselves into what was the most important thing. So I think that was important, safety. How we received the information, how we gave back the information, because it's also they want to know that the patient is okay, and how they did know on the stimulation, because we'll be able to micromanage on how we get better situations. So the first part of this, there was clear communication. So that was between the doctor, Debbie as the coordinator and the compliance person, the patients, they felt safe, they felt taken care of. Once they flew over to Mexico, they knew exactly when to come, where to come, how to arrive. They were accompanied by someone just to make sure that this is the same as London. You drop me off in London, I'm going to be lost, So it is a complex city. And so patients were happy. They felt listened to, they felt they were being taken care of. That was very important. But they also got to see exactly everything that was happening. So that for me is very important, that we're having understanding where the cycle was. I got the report from the doctor over from the UK. The moment they left, I got everything from the lab test, what dose they had, what medication was on. We're using medication that they have both in the UK and here, so that we understand also the medications our nurses don't get lost in the process, and we as doctors don't get lost. So we received them, and they kept going with their stimulation exactly as they were doing in the UK. They met, different accent with the doctor, but it was more or less the same protocol. We explained to patients why they had come in this dose, how to do their trigger. They had their pickup. This patient specifically, this set of therapy, had went through other stimulation process, so they already understood more or less what they were going through, but they were explained as to all the process. And then we did a post-operative follow-up just to make sure before leaving. Why? Because there are risks of latent OHSS. There could be a little bit of bleeding from the ovaries. There could be signs of infection. I mean, they're very rare complications, but we do not want them to board a 12-hour flight before, if we're not 100% sure that these patients are able to fly. And they understood at all points, every single point, they knew that there was always a small risk, but potential for their safety. They would tell them, you cannot fly, you have to stay in Mexico 5 more days, 6 more days, just to make sure before you get on the plane, because once on the plane, becomes a very scarier situation. No? So I think that's a little bit, and that's where we aligned very well. I think UK clinic, Debbie, Fertilidad Integral, we put that as number one. We do want great results, but number one will always be the patient safety, and that's where we went through. And at the end of the day, what we're doing in Mexico with what's happening in the UK and all over the world tends to be very similar. Yeah, there are small adjustments that need to be made, but I think we worked very happily together, the doctor in the UK and myself, as to how we're stimulating. Like, there was never a big difference in opinion, and that made it a very smooth process.
No. And one of the reasons why people might choose to do this, like if you're a British set of intended parents, creating embryos in the UK, they then need to be quarantined. It's probably going to take maybe 6 months to get those embryos created, quarantined and shipped. So for some people, they just don't have that time scale, and they want to move quicker than that. So this might be an option for them to save some time. Are there any scenarios where someone wouldn't be eligible for this? And what would those elements be? What would prohibit them from doing this type of...
a long list. But
yeah, but just so if someone's listening or watching,
I would say patients that are in extreme high risk of either OHSS, also patients who are at high risk of cycle cancellation, okay, because they might have very little fuse, very low ovarian reserve to make the whole traveling understanding coming in, we might lose safety. A patient with a high risk for thromboembolism, so this is one of the complications that we're also scared, especially on flying. So any kind of ovarian stimulation will produce a higher risk of thromboembolism, which is just clotting in your legs, heart, brain. We want to avoid this. And then long flights are also a high risk. No? So these are patients who will have aspirin. They will have TET stockings that will improve circulation on the patients, because we do want to diminish. Those will be the two main criteria. Patients who don't understand or having trouble understanding indication, medical indication, can be complicated, can be scary to be injecting yourself. So timing is of the essence. So patients that we don't see, that don't really understand the whole process, they might be patients that we would not feel so comfortable making this kind of more complex treatment, because they are more complex. And every time you put in a factor of complexity, you have a factor of human error. And those are things that we do have to understand, that we are exposing ourselves to have a better understanding and better communication with our patients to understand. And patients who don't understand the whole risk scenario, no? That would be the main thing. The patient that doesn't understand that this puts them at that different stage of a normal IVF cycle that already has their own complexities.
Yeah, anyone that has any comorbidities, so other complex medical conditions that could prohibit, it could be a cardiac issue. I'm not going to send somebody that's got a complex cardiac problem to a city that hasn't got the cover for them to look after their other medical conditions. Yeah. But Jose's highlighted that very clearly at the beginning. Communication is really key, and anybody that we would refer through MSJ, we would always refer in writing. This is the patient, this is their medical background, their age, etc., and Jose then makes a clinical decision about whether it's appropriate for us to refer that patient. And by keeping patients safe, that includes other complex conditions that would prohibit them making that journey. And the patients need to understand that too, that that's in the best interests of them.
Yeah. And often you're the first point of call, aren't you? When people start discussing this about, is this something that I can achieve, you would then have those conversations with them, do a general assessment whether they would meet the criteria, whether they could be successful, or whether there's anything that would be a challenge that would prohibit them from doing it.
Correct. And I've got 2 couples at the minute that have got other complex medical conditions, and just communicating with the clinicians in the UK, I know that I'm not going to send them out to Mexico City, because it's just too dangerous.
Much of a risk.
And too risky for them.
Yeah, and it ultimately is about keeping everyone safe. We want to enable people to do this, but we always have to ensure that it's safe to do that, right?
Debbie hit the point at the beginning of this conversation. Safety goes first.
Yeah, always.
We should do no harm. If we extra expose, for whatever reason, because everybody wants to do as good to the patient, because we're looking to form a family, but if we're exposing a healthy patient for a dream, then we're not doing the correct job.
No. And one of the points you picked up, Jose, I just want to elaborate on it a little bit, is that the MSJ team will take the intended parents to all of the appointments. They'll make sure they get to the clinic on time. They'll do all of those things. That's just part of the process when you do this process as well.
But I think that was part of the SOP that we created.
Yeah,
it was like, how are they going to navigate Mexico City? How are they going to arrive? How do they know where to go?
Because time is critical, right?
Of course, time is critical. And And patients are stressed enough during an IVF process,
it's
not
already
to
stressful.
add. Yeah.
Correct.
And they've just got off a 12-hour flight. They're probably quite anxious about it, and it's an anxious time, right?
And there are things. No, Mexico has a great program of fertility, and there are other things. I mean, Mexico has a very long history of reproductive programs, but people are coming into a country that lots of them don't know. There's a history, or there's a tale around what happens in Mexico. It's not the same Mexico City, Polanco. I mean, there are a lot of types of Mexicos, the same there are a lot of types of UK, there are a lot of types of Londons, no? And this understanding has to help people feel safe and understand that the quality of reproductive treatment that they're gonna get in Mexico and the safety standards is the same that they're getting in the UK, no?
No.
And because I've been here before, I've had the pleasure of being at the clinic itself, and I can confidently say you will get a level of experience that you should expect to complete your journey in Mexico City. Please please be fully reassured.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to pick up, actually, because a lot of people, sometimes if it's the first experience they have, the first conversation around doing a journey in Mexico City, there are a lot of people who are quite anxious about it. They worry about the level of care, they worry about the success rates, all of those things. Debbie, from your experience of, I know you've been to the clinic, and I know you have a lot of dealings with Fertilidad Integral and the team there. What's your view, and what would you say to those intended parents who are concerned about the level of care there?
So just meeting the team and seeing the premises, seeing the clinic and the infrastructure. To walk into an IVF clinic, you need to know that the laboratory meets all the quality standards, that the air filtration systems are compliant and work, etc. All of those components are there. And, if people have any misunderstanding of what the care might look like when they come into Mexico City, then they're deluded, because I would confidently say to them, you will meet the standards that you would expect in the UK or any other thriving city that can provide an IVF facility or care that you deserve.
And I agree with you, because I'm just preaching to the choir here, but I'm really impressed by the clinic, and we work really closely with your team, Jose, and I know that the standards are there. But talk to us a little bit about the standards that you operate to, because there are lots of international standards, and we know that we're regulated in the UK and the standards are really high. Talk to us about how you would look at that in terms of the ones you operate to.
So this is what we work with. So we want to be up to, our mission is to be up and above whatever standard there is regulation in Mexico or around the world. We want to be the best clinic. So we should be up to standard with regulations, and there can be some difference because each country has specific regulations that could contradict each other, but it doesn't tend to be with the quality of medicine. So because we're a Latin country, because we're in Latin America, we're regulated on the non-governmental international association that regulates us, which will be ESHRE in Europe. For us, it's Red Lara. So we are accredited by Red Lara. For us, it was very important to get that accreditation, because that lets us know that in our country. But we're also looking every day as to how can we become better. Like, what other accreditations, international accreditations, can make us, make us better, because that's all we care about, to be honest. When we get an accreditation, it's just for us to show that we're doing the best we can, and to also get recommendations to see how we can do better. If there's anything we can increase, there's always things to do. The day that we say we're perfect, that's the day that you should never trust us, because we can always improve a little bit on our standard operating procedures. That being said, we try to compare ourselves with the best programs all over the world, because that allows us to know that with regulations that maybe don't apply to us, we try to keep up to standard with ESHRE, with the ASRM, with SART in the US, in that case, which is the regulatory component in the US, or what would be HIFA in the UK. So we are reading what you guys are doing to try to keep it up to standards, not only because we want to be regulated, but by being regulated up to standard, we'll get better success rates. And that's the way also that we know we're doing the best job that we can do today. When we compare our results that we consider with clinics that we consider world-class, we tend to be up there with them. There will be small difference because of population, age, what happened with the sperm, etc. There will be differences, but they have to be small. Inside certain range, we are happy with the results we're having. We can compare ourselves to it. And that's why we also open up our lab. Our lab is one of the few labs in Mexico that will have anybody that wants to come to see the clinic that comes for a regulatory basis, or people we're working with that want to see it to make sure that we're doing up to par job. We'll be happy to show it. We have never closed our doors to anyone, because we're very proud of what we're doing, and we want to help, the transparency lets you know that Mexico is doing a good job. There is a very good history of reproductive programs in Mexico. We're not the only ones. I always say we stand on the shoulder of giants. Like, this is not the only good clinic in Mexico. It's what I've seen during my life, during my professional life, and also thanks to my father that has been in this since 1986, which was the first fertility clinic. And now I've been able, how can we improve that next step? How can we become that little bit better? And that's the way that we see medicine, no? And I think everywhere around the world, how do we increase a little bit to improve success rates, improve safety, and tackle the problem, which is what I love about today's podcast, because egg retrievals, we've been doing them. That's the most important thing in IVF, not lab, no. Yeah. Stimulation is the thing that's made us be able to do IVF. How do we do it internationally? How do we start talking? How can we maintain safety without, how are we triggering? Hey, does the crazy doctor in Mexico, he tends out to do the same thing that the UK doctors are doing. So like they were like, yeah, it's not so different because, hey, it is scary. It'd be scary for me to land and have to do some medical treatment in the UK, not because there is no regulatory basis, etc. Because I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to get to a doctor in the UK. No.
Does that not give you reassurance, though, that Jose and his team, they don't have to be regulated, but he puts himself in that position.
Setting the standard, isn't
and
it?
Trust me, being accredited to any standard, regulatory or otherwise, is a tough job to get through, is it not?
It is.
To put yourself through that voluntarily, does that not tell you that he wants to be with the giants?
It does, but I also think it's one of the reasons why we partner with you. You know, we want to make sure that our intended parents or our members get access to the best possible care, and we can absolutely with confidence say that that's what they're going to get from Fertilidad Integral. Now, I'm not going to ask you this question, Jose. I'm going to ask Debbie it, but talk to and let the listener, or someone who's watching, understand what they should expect from Jose, because I know that I've dealt with lots of intended parents who've had consultations with him, and he has just such a human, and he just has such an approach that puts them at ease, gives them confidence. So just tell them what they could expect.
Just success, but
he's
welcomes.
He is
he's very compassionate about his patients, and he's very, very keen to do the best job ever, which any clinician will always want to do. But just seeing how he responds, the communication that we have together, how he makes it work for the patients, but in a safe, compliant way. The expectations that patients have, it is a very high standard. They want to create these embryos. They want to have the best possible care that they can. And we can confidently say that they do get that when they come here.
The one thing that I think needs adding to that is that I think you always make time for people.
Yeah.
You speak to them yourselves. You make time for them. You know, I think they feel very considered and looked after when they deal directly with you, because you're the clinical director, but you're dealing with them direct, and you're showing that commitment to them about how you're going to look after their treatment.
I think that's part of the vision of Fertilidad Integral, but it's also the way I see medicine. Okay, we have a big team behind us: nursing staff, people in administration, other doctors that help us, that we help each other to try to create those spaces where we can talk directly to patients. Even the set of IPs that came to Mexico, they were seen by other doctors, but they always had a time, at certain moment, where they could, hey, you're the doctor that gave me the online consultation, you're the person who's responsible for me. I have this question. I want to understand this situation. I want to know, hey, what happens in that situation. And that's what I was talking a little bit, that and I'm not saying it's not human. Doctors have only so much hours a day.
Yeah.
And so we want to create a network where we don't lose that face-to-face, because we're all human, and to recognize that face will give us confidence into that kind of program. And we do it with UK patients, but we do it with all our patients. We try to maintain certain verticality in medicine, which in Europe and in the US has been lost because of volume, because it's not a bad thing. They've made it very efficiency. It's important also in this kind of programs. But sometimes Latin patients have the situation where they need to see a doctor. And so we want to extend it also to our European patients, because it's a different experience, but it also gives us safety as to you being able to see into the eyes of your patient and say, she understood, she knows. It wasn't my physician's assistant or my nurse, which are great at explaining sometimes, much more patient, but at least those 5 seconds, I know she understood what I said. I know she or he doesn't have any more questions that I need to pretend to explain. No? And then a lot of without my nurses, I'd be dead. I mean, I love them. They're more patient than me. They're amazing. So we do need that clinical team behind us, because if not, it'd be impossible. But yeah, we try to give that special time.
They can be nervous. RIPs can be nervous because they start with a clinic, UK or otherwise, and they start to build a trust with that team, that doctor, and now suddenly they're travelling halfway around the world and they're going to meet a doctor they've only met via Teams or Zoom, and they need to build confidence that they've got that backup and that support to get them to the end point.
In the normal IVF process, you'll see the patient in the clinic between diagnostic workup, stimulation, etc., maybe 20 times. And out of those 20 times, 17 were in the UK and 2 or 3 are in Mexico City. Yeah. So, of course, they're hard with their doctor and their clinical team over in the UK. They have to make that switch. So we want them to see us as part of that team. That's why the communication is important.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
They're an extension of a team together. Yeah. And as MSJ, we're the hub that brings it all together and gives them the reassurance that there is that clinical support that they're going to need. Because at the end of the day, it is, the psychological, etc. But that clinical bit needs to work and needs to have the right people to make the decisions about their doses and when to go for egg retrieval and the embryo crate, all of that. You need to have a confident person that's going to be able to deliver that.
And it's a big commitment to want to do this as well, isn't it? They have to commit to doing it. It's sometimes often really out of their comfort zone. Often these patients have been through a challenging fertility journey already, so it's that they're used to what that looks like. So then you're asking them to do something very, very different to what they're used to, but potentially to get a really good outcome. So, but I know, Doctor, that our members really appreciate the approach that FI or Fertilidad Integral give, and I think it makes a massive difference to when they arrive in country. And then I think you see this almost, they arrive, they get the consultation and they just relax a little bit because they have the confidence that it is what they thought it was going to be.
It's the tequila day.
Well, look, I think there was a lot of interesting things brought out on this particular podcast, and if there's anything specific that we haven't covered on this topic, then by all means reach out to us on the team. So thank you both for taking part on this, and thank you for the work that you've both done and contributed with the UK doctors to making this pathway possible and giving people access to it that they typically, I don't think there's many of the other organisations that operate in Mexico that do this, particularly for international intended parents. So thank you for making the effort to get the protocols and being so diligent in building those protocols to be successful.
Thank you for inviting us, Wes.
Thank you. So if you want to hear more about the topics that we discussed in the podcast today, then you can book a consultation or you can look at visiting us at our website, which is mysurrogacyjourney.com. Don't forget there are other episodes available whether you're listening via our app, via Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google or YouTube, there's still time to get your other fix. So we've loved having you today. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and feel free to leave reviews too if this podcast was helpful for you. Until next time, hasta luego.